Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. And of course, thank you to my volunteers. Without you, this would be completely impossible, so thanks so much. Tonight, we're going to explore the world of theater in Toronto. For those of you who've been to the Salon before, you know that I believe, and that it's true, that the performing arts, visual art, and music make an enormous contribution to the economy. The culture sector is a great wealth creator and one of the fastest growing industries in Toronto. And you don't need to take my word for it, of course. There are plenty of studies that have proven this. Beyond that, the performing arts in particular are remarkably resilient. New creators and companies like Salon West find new ways to work, even though organizations and individual artists often are facing human and financial resource deficits. To put it simply, the sector is growing faster than the resources that have traditionally supported it. When you look closer at all the resources available, though, you see the true abundance and the waste in our time. There are unused hours in rehearsal facilities, unused blocks of time in performance venues, and a sea of props that gather dust in warehouses. Perhaps we should be sharing our resources differently. Beyond that, the city's local newspapers dedicate more inches of print to Broadway shows than local productions by Canadian playwrights. Many of them, including the Globe and Mail, refuse to cover non-union productions, which make up a large proportion of the independent theater scene. Back to my original point, though, the arts sector in Toronto is an enormous industry. In the core, there are around 83,000 arts workers, and in the GTA, an additional 130,000. And we generate around $9 billion of Toronto's GDP every single year. But where is the money going? For example, many of the actors in the Fringe Festival, after all their hours of rehearsal and hours of performances, are only paid about $20. This needs to be examined. The other issue within theater that needs to be examined, and that I'll be questioning Richard about a great deal, is diversity. Audiences in Toronto are not always reflective of the cultural makeup of this city, and neither is the repertoire or the casting. Our theaters are mostly led by people who've grown up with a Canadian perspective, one that I share, that is to produce shows by George Bernard Shaw and cast with classically trained Christopher Plumbers. And they're wonderful productions. But in Toronto, we now have a city where over half the population are born outside of Canada, and they might not have a reference point of Christopher Plummer or George Bernard Shaw. I'm proud that there's progress now, like the breakout hits, Choi's Kim's Convenience, but it's slow. And there's only so long you can have a theater scene in a city like this that does not accommodate the narratives and symbols and actors of the multicultural communities that make up this city. So, with these few words, to provide some context for tonight, I'd like to say welcome to Salon West. So, Richard, it's off to you.
Thank you. Were you going to ask me something? Or
No, I'm just going to let you spiel.
Well, okay, so the Tarragon Theater.
How do you stage a play at Tarragon?
Well, I brought a prop. And this is a little example of, and I was having this discussion a couple of days ago with my general manager, because we're having a few issues about how you make theater and how the money is spent to make that theater. So I said, I think I'm going to make this speech to my board. Inside there is a sculpture. What is in the rock that we're going to sculpt? Anybody want to throw in an idea? Is it a Henry Moore? Is it a Brancusi? Is it a Sorrel Atrog? Is it Anthony Caro? Is it, what is it? Is it a craft? Is it, you look at the shape of the thing, you make a guesstimate, you begin to cut into the rock, some of the rock is flawed, it means you have to go in another direction, you begin to impose your opinion, you begin to look around the culture you're in, and you begin to impose your opinion, you're trying to invent something out of that rock. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how do I spend money? What money should I spend? How much should I spend? Should I do this with a laser? Should I do this with just hammer and chisel? What tools do I use? Where do I expend the money? What do I do to get to the sculpture I'm trying to get to, which may not in fact be the sculpture that that I decided earlier on, because I cracked that open and went, oh, it's not going to be big enough for my polar bear as a soapstone sculpture. It's not going to be Henry Moorish enough. The quality of the rock is going to be a flaw in that. So and so all those kind of decisions, and then all the kind of decisions of how you spend money, about how you do that, is part of the process of what we do at the Tarragon, which is basically create and develop and produce new Canadian plays. Because every time the rock changes, and every time the artist who's working on the rock changes, and every time I change, and for the person who's kind of shepherding this process, or guiding the chisel, or being the chisel myself, the world is always changing. And there's one quality of the theater that you have to kind of always recognize. That in fact, you're engaged in change all the time, and that the play itself is changing, and that tonight, the performance that you're going to see tonight, Sextet by Morris Panish, will not be the same performance it was last night. So it too is a constant state of flux and change. Yes, it's basically going to be the play Sextet that's inside that rock, but it's not going to be the same way it was last night. And it's a bit mercurial in that there's two elements always going on. It's a solid, so you kind of know what it is, but at the same time it's a liquid, so it's always in some kind of motion. And that is the difficulty, and that is the guessing game, and the reliance on intuition, but then combined with the craft of making theater and what theater is. The thing that we make, actually, in the end, when you do the first cut into the rock, and that's like the script. Like that's just the script you come up with. And the script is not the end product, because the end product is not a script. It's an experience up here between me as an actor and you as an audience member that's kind of ethereal. And I have to engage your imagination in such a way that I'm giving you enough of a story up here for you to create on your own. Because in the end, half the play is up here, and the other half of the play is in your imagination, or your life experience that you draw and apply to the play. No, there's a great belief in like trying to create communities of audience. I don't believe that. I believe that each one of you have an individual experience of the play, and you sit there. You might be sitting with a group of people, and they might influence how you think and feel about the play, but each person in the audience does have an utterly individual experience. That they see things, they feel things, they laugh at different times, they cry at different times. Sometimes there's a unity of laughter, which is fine, so everybody kind of recognizes that as kind of a group thing. But that's one moment in the theater. The play keeps moving through in time and space. So what we end up doing here in the end is we create action in time and space. And what that we mean by action is something is being done up here that moves through the time of the night, or the time of the story, and moves through the space of the story, and the space of being the Tarragon Theatre in the main space, or the Tarragon Theatre in the extra space, or an environmental play out in the street, or wherever you happen to be. And action is just the event. So the words you see when you read a script is you're looking to find the event that's being created. The director's directing the action. The actors are creating the event through their physical presence. It's totally ethereal. One spends 20 years trying to figure out what the hell that is in a process of making theater in the city, making theater as an artist. And so you try to find inside the rock here some sense of action in time and space. That is, that results in a story which you then go and create all by yourself over there, while we're doing it in real time and space of being in the theater tonight. And it's changing. I've changed today as an actor. I feel a little down, feel a little, need some juice. I'll kind of run around the block, and something I'm charging onto the play, and I'm doing something different at the beginning of the play than I did last night when I kind of strode on with some power, but I'm not charging. So the actor is changing their performance, not drastically, not radically, but they can't be the same. And this is one of the things that it's sort of interesting when people try to put an ideology on the theater, or a template, or a politic, or a financial construct on the theater, or anything that's imposed some sense of definition. A review of the play is a defining thing. And yet, that's never going to hold true for the theatrical experience, because in fact what you're trying to do is get this thing that stays in a constant state of flux. Does that answer the first part of your question? Please feel free to answer the question.
I think that answers questions I never even imagined.
Yes, right.
But running the numbers though,
yeah,
and the nitty-gritty of the economics of the theater,
yeah.
How is it possible that, I, as part of the audience, I put in my $10 to go see a fringe play,
mm-hmm.
and one of the actors who could be phenomenal can end up with $20 at the end of that when we have a full house?
Right.
What's happening?
Well, every time the Tarragon does a play, we lose money. We do not make money doing plays, because it costs so much to do a play in the first place. It's a very old art form, it's a very expensive art form, and it has this labor called actors, which we have to pay for, without which we cannot do plays. But it costs. It just costs a lot of money to do the theater. Like you can imagine, you extrapolate that to the opera, you've got a group of musicians, and you've got people on stage and large courses. Those are extremely high costs for a particular art form. So when you do a play, you're going to lose money. Once, when I ran my own company, Mr. Angel, and one year we lost money on our first show of the season, and I realized that if I didn't do the next 2 plays, we'd come out with a surplus at the end of the year, rather than a deficit. So I closed the theater, I took myself off salary, and we waited at the end of the season, collected our money together, and then did the 2 plays in the following season. We collected more money. We were just that crippled by the loss of the first show. So it was a kind of a great revelation as a young producer. Like, oh, it's cheaper not to do plays than it is to do plays, and because you can accumulate money. But that's why we're subsidized. We're subsidized by the government, Canada Council, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, about 35%, and then we do fundraising, where we ask people from the community to make contributions as members, as donors, as sponsors, or whatever. And then we have about 45% of our revenue from the box office, sale of tickets. And those 3 combining forces help us to lose money. And there's, we're not interested in making money. We don't do theater to make money. Maybe you do Mamma Mia to make money after a while, but even then, probably at the initial stage of that process, they just want to evoke an experience that's joyous and wonderful. So when you have an actor and you go to the Fringe, there is no subsidy. The actor, the group of actors who are doing the Fringe show get a free space. They might have to pay a fee to get the free space. And then they have to provide their own props, their own costumes, and they provide their own marketing. And so all those are attendant costs on it. The Fringe might market sort of generally, this show is at this theater at 8 o'clock. They have to work within certain constraints of being an hour-long show or 45, 50-minute long show, so they can turn over for the next show. And they only do 5 shows. So a full house for 5 shows is, at the Fringe, can be 2 nights at the Tarragon. We run for 6 weeks. So we actually try and run a box office that runs for 6 weeks with the view that as we add on weeks, it's helping to pay down. At some point it becomes a place where a playwright can make more money on royalties, since we're very interested in supporting playwrights as a developer, producer of new Canadian plays. We try and actually mount the shows that are successful. We bring them back so they can make more money next year. We try and develop an audience by running 6 weeks, not 2 weeks, not 5 days at the Fringe, for that playwright. So Morris Panish, for example, we've done nearly 11 plays of his. We are selling very well. One, it's a popular play, it's funny, it's charming, it's about sex, it's also philosophical and meaningful, it's also deep in its own way. But he has an audience based on Morris Panish plays. So we're trying to generate an income for Morris that'll carry him. Now this play took 2 years, 2.5 years to write. So he'll make 20,000 maybe. He'll make that chunk of money for that. But 2 years at 20,000, not very much money. Right? But it's a portion of his income. And so when you see the playwrights, they're at the Fringe, the actors at the Fringe making $10, it's because they're paying for all their own costs, except for the theater and lighting and sound.
I was reading up on the rise and demise of various theater companies in town, and they were saying that there's a real bias, or it's a real hurdle if you don't own your own theater space. So do you have any thoughts on renting versus actually being an owner of a performance venue?
Yeah, well, my life has been really a split between those two examples. When I ran Netzer Angel for 20-some years, the principle of the company was not to own a theater. The principle was to put most of the money into the art and to rent a theater and not be burdened by the cost of running a theater, running a building, paying for heat, and et cetera, and to really focus our money on the projects. And that was a bit of a radical principle at its time, because mainly most of the theaters, like the Tarragon, had established spaces. Aston had a theater, Toronto Free Theatre had a theater. People were trying to get spaces and own those spaces. And so in the kind of second generation that we were, after the alternative theatre scene started, we were kind of smaller alternative theatre scene. We were also not just doing new Canadian plays, but we were doing international plays and adaptations of classics, where these places were a little bit more devoted to new plays, although here they did classical plays in the early years. And we do now. Unlike Factory, which is primarily devoted to new Canadian plays sold. So they even have a harder game at it, because it's really difficult to market and sell new Canadian plays that nobody knows what they are. I was an associate director at Stratford for a couple of years, and just starting out there. And there was a production of Hamlet, and there was a production of As You Like It. And at the end of the season, we'd all been participating. Oh yes, Hamlet, As You Like It, it's good balance, comedy, or whatever. Hamlet, which was a terrible show, it was a terrible production, sold at 95%. As You Like It sold at 72%, which was a tremendous production. People went to Hamlet because of name recognition. Just that. It happens time and time again. The 5 plays you learned in high school are the 5 plays that more people go to than As You Like It, which is not like an unknown play, but it gets only 72%. And it was a fabulous production. And I went, oh, this is something I learned about name recognition. So we're in the business of trying to sell something nobody knows, which makes it a kind of another kind of proposition, like there's an unknown product. Hence, when we have a Morris Panish, who's been seen here 11 times, he's got an audience that will go to a Morris Panish play as much as to this play called Sex Time. So we're promoting that. But it is very difficult to make money in the theater, unless you have a tremendous commercial hit. Now, the opposite example of that is you get one of those plays like Drowsy Chaperone, which starts in the Fringe, someone goes, this is very important, picks it up from one of the alternative theaters, and Peter Pasquarone picked it up, did a version of that there. Then the Mirvishes picked it up, and then got rewritten and rewritten again, and went on to Broadway. It's been highly successful and made those guys all buckets of money, right? I'm not sure if they, the original actors that were in that show at the Fringe, not the same group of people necessarily, they did make some money. And that is the game we play, right? We make an investment, so it's very entrepreneurial in a sense, that kind of work. But I think, in a way, camera's on.
Don't worry,
we're not going to broadcast that.
We'll cut it. We'll cut it.
Got it. I do feel, and I feel as a theater that pays artists and pays a weekly wage and tries to pay playwrights, I feel it's a bit unfair. These massive festivals, and I could say Nuit Blanche or the Fringe or Summerworks, where they're not actually paying artists. They actually don't make an investment in the artists. The artists make all the investment, and the artists get a cut of the box office. And I think there's something in our culture going on right now where this is being permitted, or it's being acceptable. And of course, artists will work for nothing. They want to produce. They'll just give up the paycheck to make sure they get their show done. And it feels a bit exploitive. You know, I feel it's unfair. And then I know I'm trying to raise money. So when the Fringe and I get in competition for raising money, and Kelly Strawn used to work here, I feel like, yeah, but you don't pay your artists. We pay the artists. Like now with Nuit Blanche, that Saturday night, our audience goes down. And we're always in competition with free events. And I was talking today of George Brown, the George Brown Theater Program Advisory, and we've been talking about this sense that people don't want to pay artists. And I find it unconscionable. The artists should get paid for the work they do. And that's why we need government funding, and that's why we need people to support us in fundraising, donors and sponsors and whatnot. But I do feel like we really need more government funding, and we need maybe less focus on for free events.
Well, I mean, there definitely is
Or $10 events.
There's a strange culture. Just through my travels and talking to people, there's an attitude that you shouldn't have to pay for art. You shouldn't have to pay for access to music, or
that's part of that.
Painting, yeah, or theater, or anything. And when an artist says that they sell their work, the reaction they often get is that somehow they've sold their souls, and the work isn't pure just because they also need to eat. So that's very strange. And I mean, while I understand the need for more government funding, because our per capita funding in Toronto is not nearly as high as it is in Montreal or Chicago or New York when it comes to the arts, I mean, there are other ways that we can support the arts in the city that aren't just through government grants, because there's a lot of obstacles to even accessing those grants, especially if you're a new organization. But I mean, the fact that our transit system sucks is a big problem, because it means that folks from outside of the core have difficulty accessing the arts, which are concentrated in downtown, or that artists have trouble getting to their own work or training sessions. I mean, at the National Ballet School, they're having a lot of issues right now because of transit, because their residences, which used to house students from all over the country, are needed for students from Etobicoke and Mississauga who can't reliably get downtown to class, and that's ridiculous. The other thing is making it easier for private donorship, I think, is important. So being able to issue a healthy tax credit to get the public to fund what they think is interesting, I think, and private industry as well. I think that would be really helpful. But what about you all? I mean, what do you want to know about? He's right here.
It's interesting.
Ask
If you look at how much money, tax-wise, you get back when you make a political donation, compared to the donation you make to a hospital or to an arts organization, and then kind of write-off you get. You don't get 100% off. Political donations, you do much better.
You get 75.
And you might even get a rebate with local politics. I do think that there has to be a shift primarily now, given the culture where it's come to now over time, is that we need a really large infusion of government funding into the arts. And if the government does that, it will give credence to people making donations or corporations. And it becomes almost matching, in a sense, not technically matching, but ethically and philosophically say this company is worth putting $100 million into, and it will increase our fundraising. And we'll also have the ability to raise more money if we got some kind of increase. But we've been at a plateau, we're just a little bit inching here and there. And young companies, stand a terrible time. At the same time, those companies that succeed are succeeding. Those companies that are in the fringe that did the show that succeeded pushed through. And sadly, it's a bit cutthroat, the business of it. When you want people to go to a hot show and it's packed out, and the show next door at the fringe is not hot, no one goes. And that is the brutality of the business. That's kind of the thrill of it. I have to admit, that's part of the thrill when you got a hot show. You just go, you feel like you're on top of the world. And then you have a bad show, we've had those too. You just feel like, okay, well, we've got to learn and do better from it. But it is thrilling. The survival instinct of the theater, the entrepreneurial spirit is quite a wonderful thing. But it would be, we really are due for a change in how the government views us, and where the government's putting the money too. It isn't just where there is the money, it's where they're putting the money. And where they're putting the resources. And, there are, pretty big ministry of cultures at all levels of government administering or dealing with the funds, and I think that needs to be changed. In fact, not the councils, not the Canada Council, Ontario, outside of Toronto, but the organizations around that are doing minister of culture stuff. But you go, well, why? We don't really need them. Just give the money to the Canada Council. They have a system already in place, a peer-assessed, juried system, very thoughtfully carried out, and people who know, artists who know what it's like to make theater, judging you, and making those kinds of assessments. But we have this other thing, which is government let go, will fund your theater in this community, and somebody in this community gets a whack of money because it's political. And I think that's wrong. I think it should be going to the arts councils, and they don't get enough funding. But there is no pizzazz in the arts councils. It's kind of dull, boring, rote, diligent work that the arts council are doing to make fair assessments of arts organizations. So you don't walk in and cut a ribbon to the new theater you build in Markham. That's where the politician gets to shake your hand. It's not the best system. And that theater isn't built from inside by artists building a theater and building an audience for that theater. They're imposed theaters in the community because Markham needs their regional theater. But they're doing plays from away. They don't have a community of artists attached to the theater. It's like a roadhouse. And we see that all through the GTA. Why is the GTA getting funding? When, as you say, they're not doing shows up there, when they're doing weekend shows. Because it's political and because that's where the votes are.
But maybe people outside of the core are entitled to have theaters and to have access to plays.
They are absolutely entitled, but they should come from artists building theaters, not from government authorities building theaters, not from politicians building theaters, but artists building theaters. Like artists built this place, like artists built factories, right? They saw the need and they built it, and they saw an audience, and they built that audience. Those organizations have been imposed on those communities, but they're coming from political decision, voters' decision, an electoral decision that's coming up, and it's not artists generating that work which makes that Markham Theatre a community of Markham actors or professional actors working in Markham.
I mean, I get where you're coming from, I do, but, you know, I believe in good governance and the necessity for someone at some point to take some leadership in building our communities outside of the core. Because there is talent there, and there are great people there.
I'm not
but there's
disputing
no
outside the core.
resources.
I'm not disputing outside the
you know,
core.
like
I'm talking about
Rexdale.
artists doing it versus government authorities doing it.
A lot of those artists don't have the money to be able to build theaters or fund the murals that now, you know.
But why do the
showcase
government
talent
have the money to
in
fund the
the-
theater?
in
The
that
government should be funding the artists to build the theater. That's what I'm saying. So there's artists in Markham who are willing to work. They should be funding those artists to build that theater versus top down. So
My
that's
my
where
last
we-
point before I throw it to someone else is, you know, grant writing is actually a very difficult thing to do. If you're just an artist or an arts administrator, you might not be gifted at grant writing. And a lot of these grants, you only have access to it if you've managed to exist and put together a sizable body of work for several years. So if you have zero money to begin with, how are you supposed to develop this amazing portfolio so that the artists who are your peers will bless you with some grant money? I don't know. There are just some questions I think that are worth exploring when it comes to resource allocation. You want to respond, and then you have a question. Yes. Or, yeah.
It currently, and for a very long time, those very early years of an artist doing work, they were tended to be performing for their friends, their peers, their family. In a sense, it was kind of an amateurism, but they're trying to work at a professional level. They are making their own investments in trying to create the shows, sort of like the Fringe, but a little bit further than the Fringe, not just 5 shows. When I started out, I ended up touring a great deal into northern Saskatchewan and northern Ontario, as well as performing in Toronto. When I could see there was people willing to sponsor those tours and help to pay for the run of the show in Toronto. But at the same time, since we had very little government funding, but we were building up a body of work and making sure that people at the arts councils or assessors were seeing that work. I think that holds true today. But there's more people doing more work, and there's probably less money to get in the door, proportion. And the councils keep trying to redivide the money. So the Canada Council last round and the Ontario Arts Council this round, they would take off the top 20% of your funding for everybody and create a pool and then reassess those companies where they stood. Some people went above, got more. Most people got less, and they created in that pool of money the opportunity for the emerging companies or younger companies funding them to a certain level. At the same time, in that process, so it was very brutal. So people both in established theaters and baby theaters experienced severe cuts. And it was a very difficult process, and we're sort of cannibalizing ourselves a bit in that process. I don't see what else they can do because they're not being funded in this arm's length peer assessment jury process. And that's what the arts councils do. They're fantastic organizations, and they've been, when they got set up, they were set up in the right way, and they've been able to continue in the right way. But they don't get the funding that goes direct funding to various festivals, or that is political money.